Morning, everybody. I know that there is a lot going on in the world, and so thank you for joining us today. Let me close the window. I swear to God, no cars ever go past until I start and go live on one of these. So have you ever felt really overwhelmed when it comes to vaccinations? I know that there's a lot to think about with immunizations, vaccinations, all of that in the pet world. And so today we are going to go and tackle that, answer your questions that you might have. But first, my name's Nissa. I'm the owner of Magic of Paws, helping you help your pets. And we are going live today on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. So if you see me panning back and forth as far as where I'm paying attention, it's because I've got people on 2 different cameras. But I'm hoping that we can make this work. So let me know that you're here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. But let's get down to business. So it is National Immunization Awareness Month. And because of that, we're going to go through and tackle a bunch of different questions that you might have. And the first one is pretty simple. What is immunization? So immunization is the process by which immunity is transferred to a person or an animal. And it can happen in a couple different ways. One is naturally, where we are talking about you are exposed to a disease or infected by a disease, and then you carry on immunity afterwards. The most common one that people think about is chickenpox as far as people go, but it can also be for things like your common cold, different strains of the flu, and hopefully this new SARS-CoV-2 virus, the novel coronavirus. So I have 2 doggos with me today, so hopefully they're not too distracting. But most commonly, people, when they think about immunization, think about vaccination. Hi, Boomer. Someone wants pets. Vaccination is the most common form of immunization that we think about as pet owners. It feels like every time we go to the vet, there's a new vaccine, another vaccine that we need to get for our pets. And I'm going to close the door because my boyfriend's making a ton of noise downstairs. But vaccination is the most common thing that we think about. So what are vaccines? They are a product designed to confer immunity to a dog, person, cat, rabbit, whatever. And they come in all sorts of different forms. There's shots, there's like intranasal droplets that they put down your dog's nose, all sorts of different things. And they're all made a little bit differently. So I'm not going to go into like what actually forms a vaccine, what's in a vaccine, or any of that, because it's totally different. Every vaccine is different for every different disease. And then you also have different companies use different approaches, have different additives or adjuvants. So I'm not going to get into all of that. But the most important thing to think about here is, do vaccines ensure protection? And yes, yes is the thing. Nothing is 100% guaranteed in this world, and I wish it were. But as far as vaccines go, even if they don't completely prevent you or your pet from getting a disease, it can in fact lessen the severity of the disease. So in the vaccinations that we're going to talk about for cats and dogs, this is super important because a lot of the diseases that we vaccinate our pets against are lethal. So if we can even just buy us some time, make the disease a little bit less severe, it's going to make a huge impact. So next question we always get is, are there risks to vaccinating your pet? Yes, unfortunately. There's risks for everything. Nothing in the world is risk-free. But what is really important is to think about what is the risk versus the reward. And in this case, the risks are relatively minor. You're talking about some mild side effects from getting the vaccine that usually only lasts like a couple of days versus the reward is protection against diseases that are highly contagious, can spread throughout your whole community, not just amongst the animals, but also to the people, including your family. And it can prevent a lot of fatal disease from occurring. So, why do puppies and kittens need so many vaccinations? And the simple answer to this is that they're young. They're super exposed. They're super hi Ernest. They're super likely to get these diseases. They're exposed to them more in general. Plus, also there's hi Ernest off the keyboard. Oh. They also just don't have a very developed immune system. So they do get some passive immunity from their mother while they're in the womb, and then they do get some antibodies transferred to them during breastfeeding, during their from the breast milk. But once that's taken away, all of that immunity is not very long lasting. It's very, very temporary. So the sooner we can, okay, I guess I won't put you down. The sooner we can build up their own immunity using vaccinations, the better. So that's why they get so many vaccines. It's just that their immune system isn't up to snuff when it comes to preventing these diseases. But then once they go through their initial series of vaccinations, you then only need boosters for the rest of your animal's life, because you've already built up a bunch of that immunity, and the boosters just serve to remind your immune system of, hey, this is a disease that exists and you need to be worried about it. So there's a lot of vaccinations out there, and people are always wondering what vaccine should they get. And there's two different categories of vaccines. There's what we call core vaccines, which are necessary for most, if not all, animals of a specific species in a specific area, versus non-core vaccinations, which are more optional. They're individualized based off of what your pet's exposure might be in the grand scheme of things. So let's start with what's core for cats, dogs, and ferrets. This is the only vaccine that is mandatory across all three of these species, and in many states, it is actually illegal to own a pet who is not vaccinated for this, and it is rabies. So anybody who is here in Maine knows how important vaccination against rabies is. We have, I feel like every couple of weeks, there's a story in the news about a rabid fox or raccoon attacking somebody not far from me here. So it's really important to remember that this is still out there. It's all over the place, and it is highly deadly. Most people's exposure to it is from Old Yeller and the hydrophobia, and that's just one of the symptoms of rabies, which is a severe fear of water or liquid of any kind. And it's part of what makes this disease as fatal as it is. It also impacts the brain, the neurological system, causes fever, hallucinations, increased aggression, and salivation, that foaming at the mouth that we hear about all the time. It is 100% fatal if your pet is not vaccinated for it. So you want to make sure that you're getting that vaccination done ahead of time, preventing this from ever being an issue. Because as soon as you see any symptoms of rabies, it is too late. There's nothing you can do. So if your dog, cat, ferret should always be up to date on their rabies vaccination. And if they are exposed to a potential rabies infection, you want to make sure that you take them back to the vet for a booster within 24 hours. As far as people go, it's a lot more intense because we don't get our regular vaccinations against rabies. But it is still super important to see somebody within 24 hours if you think you've been exposed to rabies, because it is fatal in humans too. Very rarely do humans recover from this disease. Anyway, moving on. Let's go to core vaccines for cats. This past weekend was take your cat to the vet day, because we always forget. So we're going to start off with them. And first off, we're just going to look at their core vaccines. The main core vaccine for cats is the FVRCP vaccine. Different brands might call it different things, but in general, it is this one vaccine that covers a lot of different diseases. And they are pretty severe diseases as well. One of them is feline panleukopenia virus, which, if we break the name down, pan is universal, leuko is white blood cells, and penia is loss of. So, as you can probably guess, it means that in feline panleukopenia virus, it means that cats' supply of white blood cells is being depleted. So no need to think too hard about that. We all know that white blood cells are important to immunity. If we lose those, we are in danger. Then there's also the feline herpes virus 1, which is a little bit less severe. But then we also have calcivirus as well. If you have questions about those specific diseases, go ahead, put them down in the comments, and I'll circle back. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't know my cat diseases as well as I know my dog diseases, but I also have documentation in front of me where I can look that up if you do have questions about any of those specific diseases. So we'll move on to non-core vaccinations for cats. And this one is mainly the feline leukemia virus. Very similar to what you would think a feline leukemia virus would be, it attacks the immune system, just like leukemia does in humans. But most cats don't need to be vaccinated against the feline leukemia virus, especially if they never go outside. So it's something, that's why it falls in the non-core category. It's something you want to talk to your vet about your specific cat to see whether they need it. Now let's move on to dogs, which I know a little bit better, despite the fact that my shirt is a cat shirt today. So core vaccines for dogs, we already talked about rabies, but there's also the DAP vaccination, the DAP, again, has different names based on, depending on the brand that produced the vaccination, but it's another one of those vaccines that covers a lot of different diseases, including distemper, adenovirus or hepatitis, attacks the liver, and then also canine parvovirus, which is incredibly deadly for puppies in particular. And it's spread in the environment, causes horrible, horrible symptoms. It can be cured, but having this vaccination makes it a lot easier for a dog to survive parvo. Then we'll move on to non-core vaccinations for dogs. We have kennel cough, which is generally recommended for dogs that go to boarding, daycare, or that frequent dog parks, areas where there's a lot of other dogs coming through. I also get both of my dogs vaccinated for kennel cough, even though they don't go to doggy daycare or to a kennel, because I'm working with dogs all the time. I don't want to risk bringing something home for them. Kennel cough in general is pretty mild. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a respiratory issue. Then up around here, we have Lyme disease, which most vets, if you ask them, will recommend that you get your dogs vaccinated against Lyme, because forget what the latest statistics are, but almost every dog in the state of Maine has Lyme or has been exposed to it. The percentage of ticks that carry Lyme disease here is ridiculously high. So if you can vaccinate against Lyme disease, we highly recommend it. The vaccine itself isn't super effective. It's only about 60% effective, which is still better than nothing. But when you use it in combination with your preventatives, like your Canon Advantix or Vectra or whatever you might be using. There's so many out there now. When used in combination with that to reduce their exposure to ticks, the likelihood of them getting Lyme disease is greatly reduced. Then we also have leptospirosis, which isn't as big around here as Lyme disease, but it is still super important, especially because it can pass on to humans. So if you or anyone in your family are immune compromised in any way, shape, or form, you definitely want to have your dogs vaccinated against leptospirosis because it is not a disease that anybody wants. And then we also have canine influenza, which just like in people, is a seasonal, it's a flu. It's not as deadly, but if you can prevent it, especially if you have a dog that is more prone to severe disease, you definitely want to talk to your vet about it. All right, so those are all the vaccines that I'm going to talk about. If you have questions about them, go ahead, put them down in the comments. I'll circle back. But the next question we have is, how often will my pets need to be vaccinated? And this varies depending on the vaccine. Some vaccines last longer, like most rabies vaccines last about 3 years, whereas kennel cough lasts about 6 months. So there's this huge variety depending on which vaccine you're talking about, which brand, when it was administered. There's a whole lot going on, but in general, you want to think that your pets will probably need a vaccine at least, they'll likely need a vaccine when you go in for your annual exam. It's the best way to think about it. So one thing we get asked about are antibody titers and if they can replace vaccinations. And the answer is no, that they don't really replace vaccinations, but they are a useful tool to see whether your pet has immunity to a specific disease. Some places will accept titers in place of a vaccination, but it's few and far between, just because it's one, they're expensive, not every vet will do them, and also they're not 100% guaranteed, especially if your titer was done months ago. It could be different by the time you're going to a new kennel or whatever it is, and you don't know how long that protection is going to last, where you know if you're following your vaccination schedule that you're protected. And that's generally the answer you'll get from most people there. So do vaccinations for pets have side effects? Yes, we already mentioned that there is a very small risk to vaccinating your pet. Most commonly, these things are soreness at the injection site, lethargy afterwards. But I mean, I get that too when I go in for my flu shot. It's just like, ugh, you don't want to do anything. You also will sometimes see swelling at the injection site. Super, super common. Then you might also see some more severe side effects. Going back to the less severe side effects, you might, especially for kennel cough. I was going to try and use the fancy term, but I think that's right. I don't know. That tends to be an intranasal one, so sometimes you'll see like mucus coming out of the nose, things like that, snuffles, upper respiratory issues, but those tend to last only like 2 to 5 days. As far as the more severe side effects, sometimes cats will get sarcomas, little tumors at the site of an injection. That is super uncommon nowadays, especially as vaccine technology has improved. Other times you might see prolonged vomiting, all sorts of things like that. If you do see any more severe symptoms, you definitely want to reach out to your vet to talk to them about it and see what you can do. Most of the time, they'll just have you come in for fluids. So that's really usually all it takes to jumpstart your dog or cat back into life. So that's pretty much it for vaccinations. Let's see. I've gotten a ton of alerts while we're doing this, but none of them seem to be for comments on Facebook or anything like that. Let me scroll through over here on Instagram. Looks like we have no comments, but if you do have any questions that come up, if you're watching this on the replay, feel free to go ahead and put them down in the comments. We'll be checking them. We also are doing a Q&A over in our public group on Facebook, which is our Quarantine Survival Guide by Magic of Paws group. We're doing a Q&A over there tonight at 8 o'clock, so feel free to go ahead and bring your questions over there. We are also doing a Q&A tonight at 8:30 in our high school dog training course. So if you got a pandemic pup or you just really need to get a kickstart on your dog's training, it's something that you've let slide, I highly recommend our high school course. It goes over all of your basics for dog training, basic behaviors, and all of that. And we do have our weekly Q&A session in our Facebook group for that. tonight at 8:30. So without further ado, I will let you go. Have a great day, everybody, and make sure you give your pets some love from us. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.